episode 2 of Earbuds, the music podcast with me, Lyle, and Dan, where we talk about 2 different albums and of 2 different genres and our general thoughts on them. And the 2 albums this week are going to be I Love the New Sky by Tim Burgess. Tim Burgess, and Awake by Dream Theater.
Yes.
Just as a bit of housekeeping from the last episode, I went away and listened to a song by Scritti Politti.
Oh, right. Which one?
I listened to The Word Girl.
Oh, yeah.
And this was actually sent to me by our mutual acquaintance Larry.
Oh, I see.
Who had a listen to the last episode and recommended the song to me. And it sounded like a Michael Jackson R&B pop song. I was and I wasn't really sure what to expect based on your description, but I was sort of I was expecting a bit more socialism in the lyrics.
Well, I think that song's quite interesting because when I first listened to it, I kind of thought the word girl was some kind of term, like the it girl or something. But I think it's actually talking about the word girl, and it's kind of commenting on the use of the word girl in pop songs and how she's reduced from a person to just like a word, an object in all these kind of pop songs. And that's why it talks about flesh and blood, how your flesh and blood became the word. So I kind of thought there was sort of a feminist
makes a bit more
comment
sense.
in there. I think that's what it's about. But
that makes a bit more sense to me now, because I was looking through it and sort of trying to get to the bottom of the meaning of this song, and I was just kind of thinking, obviously there's something to this. There's something to these lyrics, but it was I think without the backstory that you'd given me, I'm not sure I'd be able to distinguish it too much from a Spandau Ballet or Michael Jackson kind of song.
Yeah. And it's interesting, and he has quite a strange, effeminate, distinctive voice.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah, and I actually saw it. It's basically one guy, Green Gartside, he calls himself.
Okay.
Who's the only constant member of the band who's gone through different lineups over the years. And when I saw him, he's like this big, strapping 6-foot guy with a beard. Sort of looks slightly similar to me in a way. So to see him like that, with that kind of effeminate voice, which sort of sounds like sort of Michael Jackson or maybe even someone else from the 80s. It's kind of slightly strange. But
second time that I came to you.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to imagine that. Are you going to recommend me one of their albums in a future episode? Maybe?
I might do. Yeah, I could recommend you that one.
Okay, all right.
That song comes from Cupid and Psyche, 85.
Yes, that's the one. That's the one. Cool. Okay, well, that'll go on the ideas pile. Should we let's start off with I Love the New Sky.
Okay. Yeah.
So I've chatted to you briefly about this already, and I'm sorry to say I wasn't a massive fan of this album.
Fair enough.
Obviously it's I wasn't sure what to expect, but seeing as it's Tim Burgess who was the frontman of the Charlatans, I guess I was expecting something along the lines of like indie rock and the kind of thing the Charlatans would do, but it wasn't like that. It was a lot poppier. It was a lot it was very kind of happy clappy.
But
I guess for lack of a better word,
it's almost hard to categorize it, I think. Because
I'd say that
it's almost like folk in a way, and just very indie, the kind of thing that you'd expect to see maybe in one of those pretentious indie movies.
Maybe. I mean, so when you were sort of describing to me, it's from the Charlatans, so I know are an indie
Yeah.
rock band, and part of that sort of Manchester scene,
Hmm.
and it's not, it's not especially my cup of tea, like that
Hmm.
kind of stuff. Like I know you're a big fan of
Yeah.
the Happy Mondays and
Hmm.
Oasis and the Stone Roses, would you say?
Yeah. I mean, I would put Stone Roses and Charlatans up there and Oasis a bit lower down.
Yeah, yeah,
You know,
sure,
I don't
sure,
like them
yeah.
as much, but yeah, all
Yeah,
that kind
yeah.
of Manchester stuff or
Yeah,
Manchester.
yeah, sure, yeah. Um, so I'm just trying to think because I've stupidly not created any notes. I was just deciding that
Yeah.
I was gonna wing it. Um, but I've listened to the first two songs like so many times.
Yeah.
Empathy for the Devil and Sweetheart Mercury,
Yeah.
and I also actually quite like the last song in it.
Oh yeah.
I think that's got a nice chorus.
Yeah.
And basically rather than like indie rock, I kind of got vibes of the Beatles a bit, like
Yeah.
David Bowie a bit, like
Hmm.
a bit of it might just be because I've been listening to them recently as well, but
Okay.
a Divine Comedy.
Oh right. Yeah.
Yeah, just with just with the kind of I don't know, the kind of upbeat nature of it, and
Yeah.
uh yeah, I mean, those are my kind of general opinions. I've got a few more things I guess I can say here and there, but
Hmm.
maybe you can give me a bit of background on this album, like what's your take on it?
Well, again, when I decided to listen to Tim's solo stuff, I was very surprised to hear how different it is to the Charlatans.
Oh
But
yeah,
I quite
yeah.
like that because it shows a different side, and it's not just like some solo artists who pretty much just do the same thing as the band they're in.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, I should probably say that I did, as research, I did go away and listen to a handful of songs by the Charlatans from their
yes.
Telling Stories album, which I actually liked a lot more
Okay. Yeah.
to this
Yeah.
one. Um, so yeah, once again, maybe another thing to put on the pile for
Okay.
a
Yeah.
future episode. But that was more sort of what I was expecting from
Yeah.
this,
Uh,
that kind of like almost kind of like, I don't know, suede, would you say, like, or
yeah.
like, a bit more rocky, a bit more
Yeah.
guitar oriented.
Bit more swagger and smarm to it.
Yeah, yeah, definitely,
And I'd
definitely.
probably say that I love the Charlatans more so actually than Tim's solo stuff, but I'd probably say Charlatans a bit more straightforward. This album is quite strange. It kind of goes off in different directions. Like the song will change halfway through,
Mm,
and there's guitars in there, but there's also keyboards and lots of violins and string instruments. So it's quite an
yeah,
interesting bag of um, musically, but also in terms of the lyrics, it's almost as if he's just kind of hasn't really sat down and constructed them. He's just kind
that
of
was the
opened his
big
mind and
sticking.
it's just blurted on the paper,
The
which
lyrics were a big sticking point for me. The
yeah,
lyrics are probably
see,
my one of my among my least favorite things
I
about the
was
album. It was
yeah.
just kind of like, were these written by a child? Like, it's just
But do,
kind
do you
of
know what I when I recommended this album to you, I felt a bit not anxious, but I was like, oh God, what's Lyle going to think of those lyrics? Because I could imagine if you're not into it not really familiar with Tim Burgess or his character and what he's about, I can imagine it would be really annoying and sort of what the hell is this about? What's he going on about? And I think I would find that too if it was someone else. But I think Tim Burgess
right.
just has such a great personality, and I really like everything he does from his listening parties, the books he's written, and the kind of person he is. I think it works because he's so likable,
Yeah, well,
and
I listened to an interview with him, and yeah, I actually found him to be a very likable
yeah,
personality. Like, I was kind of, I don't know, I've got, like I said, like the Manchester scene. I've kind of got this image of sort of like So Tim, what do you have to say about your music? Oh, fucking Manchester,
Well,
mate! Like, like
well,
just
yeah,
coming off like that. But he's a very it really surprised me. He's a very softly spoken, very
mm,
intelligent guy who it was basically the interviewer was sort of talking about how the Charlatans might be used to playing like these bigger
mm,
venues, and in his solo career, and that time now that time has moved on, uh, perhaps the audiences aren't quite so big, and he seemed like very sort of like, he seemed sort of very humble in that
yeah,
kind of way, and he's a David Lynch fan as well.
yeah, which is great.
Talking about his coffee, and I was
Mm,
sort of like, oh, David Lynch and coffee. That's something I can get behind.
yeah.
Uh, were you telling me that there was a quote from the film Angel Heart in one of their songs?
So one of the Charlatan songs, I think it's called 109 Part 2. It's
Mm.
just this kind of psychedelic instrumental bit with like a Hammond organ, but it's got dialogue from the film Angel Heart over it,
Oh,
from
okay.
that scene about the "Would you like an egg?" that
Yeah,
whole thing,
they say
which I
that
just
the
thought was
egg is
great
the
because
symbol for
you know
yeah.
when the music I like sort of crosses over with the films I like, that's great. I think
Mm, mm.
that's perfect. And one of the reasons I like Tim Burgess is he just seems really down to earth and just kind of
Yeah.
keeping it real kind of thing,
Mm,
and
mm, mm.
that's really good.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, like that's it's interesting that you should say that, because that's one of the things that I've always sort of felt about music and about really
Mm,
getting into bands. It's
yeah,
the actual music is almost kind of half the story,
yeah,
and I think in a lot of the bands that I like, there's also the whole story behind the band and how much
mm,
you can relate to them and the sort of image and the
yeah,
brand they put out there, like, and whether or not that, you know it's and I also feel like listeners have a sixth sense for how genuine that
yeah,
brand is, and talking about Oasis, I think that was a big part of uh why they were as successful as they were, was almost
mm,
kind of like half because of the music and half because I think a lot of people sort of felt these were like rock stars who were not
yeah,
your average sort of poodle haired, like, kind of typical rock star. They were sort of from
yeah,
council estates, and they were sort of a bit more, that people could look at that and say, oh, that guy's like me, and he's like,
yeah.
and they can relate to the lyrics and stuff as well.
Mm.
um
And
but I was just going to say, for the lyrics on this album, the lyrics on I Love the New Sky, there's this is going to sound so petty, but there was a line that I've already told you about, where
yeah, yeah,
I'll look it up,
okay,
where he goes, I'll have to unsubscribe from that particular tribe. And I was just like,
yeah.
oh, fuck off. Just like there's nothing I love more than like ham-fisted, oh, isn't the internet bad? Like, kind of,
Well,
aren't
I
people just
don't
a
know.
bit too ill-tempered on the internet? Unsubscribed from that particular tribe. I
I
was just
I
like,
must
fuck off.
I must admit I didn't see it like that. I disagree, but but fair
All
enough.
right, yeah,
Um,
fair enough,
but
fair enough.
again, I mean, I could sing the praises of Tim Burgess all day. But another thing I really like
Mm.
about him is, he seems like a real audiophile, musophile, if that's the word. And
Oh, sure.
he's a music artist that loves other bands, music artists, and the enthusiasm and respect he shows for them, which is, in the listening party book, that I don't know if
Oh, yeah.
I should
You
explain
did
that. So
mention. Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, go
during
ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, so during lockdown, when most people were sort of, going insane inside and wondering what to do, he decided to set up these listening parties on Twitter to sort of bring music fans together, so they would all listen to an iconic album at the same time, post tweets about it, but there'd be somebody involved in the making of the album also tweeting listening along live and tweeting their responses to hearing it again. So, all sorts of things in there.
That's really cool.
And I thought that was a really good idea. And just, there's 100 albums in that book. And I've been going through listening to as many as I can. And just the sort of the love and the enthusiasm he shows the other artists is great. And I follow him on Instagram, and he's always posting about a record that he's listening to, and there's all sorts of different things. It varies, from prog rock to soul, jazz, or even soundtracks. And I went to see the Charlatans in December at Norwich Union.
Right.
And when you're waiting for a band, they have all this intro music just while you're waiting.
Yeah.
They actually played some interesting stuff. They actually played the theme from Cinema Paradiso,
cool.
Which I thought was great. And again, I thought the sort of the two loves coming together. Here I am coming to see the Charlatans, and I'm hearing music from a movie I love. And, I wouldn't expect to hear something like that with Oasis or something like that. Yeah, and I had a weird thought that in some ways he reminds me of still Steve Wilson in a way, because they both seem like audiophiles with lots of different inspirations. But two opposite sides of the spectrum. You got Steve Wilson on the darker side, and Tim Burgess' stuff very light. So
I like how you say on the darker side.
Yes. Well, it depends how you look at it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, maybe after some of the lyrical content on Closure Continuation, I think maybe having the sort of more light-hearted stuff from I Love the Blue Sky, I think it's almost kind of just what the doctor ordered kind of thing.
I just remembered a lyric from the album. One of the songs, he goes, "What's your favourite Cure album? Mine is Pornography, but it could be any one of three," in that very kind of hot-filter way, where it's not singing, it's kind of more conversational or, strange rhythm to it. I sort of thought, wow, that's a bit of a cheesy line, but I quite like it.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. Well, just quickly, I guess to sort of conclude this section, you mentioned a lot of different musical influences going into I Love the New Sky. One of the things that I will need someone to confirm to me is that the second song, Sweetheart Mercury, really reminds me of the music from Pokemon for the Game Boy.
Right.
I will send you a copy of the did you ever play any of those?
I do. All I can remember is when you have a fight, or you come across when you start a battle and it comes up with that.
Not quite as intense as that. That's a bit more sounds a bit more like a Dragon Force song maybe. But I'm just trying to. There's one famously. There's one song. Here it is. It's the Lavender Town theme, and there were other parts of the song that reminded me, Sweetheart Mercury, that reminded me a bit of the soundtrack for one of the Legend of Zelda games. But this is it. I'll send it to you.
Okay.
Specifically in reference to the opening.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Okay.
Do you see what I mean?
I do see what you mean. Now I'm wondering if the whole album's a rip-off of,
of Pokemon
video
music, yeah.
But I do know that first song, Empathy for the Devil, the very beginning of it, I don't know if you noticed, sounds a bit like The Cure, Boys Don't Cry, that kind of...
Yes, yeah, very much so, yeah.
And even the lyrics in that, so I think talking about Make It Magnificent, which... reminds me of Blondie, Atomic. So I think, lots of, music references in there, but not too many, I don't think. But that's interesting, though, about that Pokemon.
Yeah, I mean,
I do see what you mean.
I'm not really sure what to make of it, because there's a definite 8-bit quality to the opening synth on that song, and I wonder if I don't know whether that makes him more cool or less cool, because like that's kind of that song that I just sent you, if you don't recognize it, the Lavender Town theme. I think a lot of people who played Pokemon at a young age find it to be quite a disconcerting and scary song, and there are all sorts of I don't know, kind of like scary stories that people made up on the internet that sort of become like memes or whatever, of I found like a haunted version of the Pokemon game, and I woke up in the middle of the night and the Lavender Town theme was playing because a Pokemon was going to kill me or something. So part of me's wondering whether Tim Burgess is like, I don't know, he's up to date with his internet references, and he wanted to make a reference to that in his album. But
yeah, it's like, why can't we
sure.
go
I
back
don't
to
like
just
I say I don't
Game
know if
Boys?
that makes him more cool or less cool. Probably a bit of both.
Yeah, I would like to say.
Yeah.
I did just type in Tim Burgess Pokemon to Google, see what it came up with, and it does seem like he's referenced Pokemon quite a lot in things.
No,
So
really?
well, as in just generally referencing it. On Twitter, he's posted a picture of his album, and he's put like Pikachu figures on it and says Pokemon Attack on new solo album. So I mean,
wow,
he must be quite into Pokemon then. So maybe, who knows?
Into it, yeah. I wonder what his starter Pokemon is. Probably a Squirtle, I reckon.
A Squirtle, yeah. Is there a cooler Pokemon than that? A more
Squirtle's got the sunglasses, doesn't he?
Oh yeah.
So that's why I sort of, maybe that's just making me think of like a Squirtle with like I don't know, a bottle of Stella in his hand, just like with an Aspo, just like waddling down the street.
Can you do an impression of Tim Burgess referencing Squirtle in a song? Like, from what you've heard, do your impression, his lyrics that he might come up with about Squirtle or Pokemon.
My favorite Pokemon was a Squirtle. The other one's a total shit. Sorry, that's about the best I can do, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Professor Oak, he came to me and he said, have one of these. He gave me a Pokeball and it was all right.
Oh, that's great. It sounds very like the Beatles, actually.
It does a bit, doesn't it?
Yeah. Wow.
Oh,
yeah. Okay.
Can we move on now?
Yeah. Okay. Finally, what would you give the album out of 10? I'll brace myself.
You're gonna hate me for this, but right. In my heart of hearts, I want to give it a 4.
Okay.
In my, there's sort of like there's a devil on my shoulder that wants to give it 4, and there's an angel that says, no, go on, mate,
5.
give it a 6. Give it a 6. Give it a 6. He references Pokemon in it. You love that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, how about 5?
That's easily worth a 6. Yeah. I think I'd give it 5 out of 10, which is harsh because it deserves more than that. Like you say, like you can clearly hear the passion for music and the different influences that have gone into it. It's just really not my cup of tea, man. It's just really kind of like, I was listening to it just sort of thinking, oh, I'd rather listen to something else, actually.
When's the guitar solo coming in?
Yeah, exactly, right, exactly. Yeah, when's it gonna rip into a 3-minute instrumental section in Compound Time or whatever, which I suppose brings us on to part 2, which is Awake by Dream Theater.
Yes, Awake.
Now, I mean, so this is I'll just come right out of the gate and say it that like this is one of my favorite albums of all time.
Oh,
so feel free to absolutely rip it to shreds.
Well, no, you know what? I think it's I like Dream Theater. And I listened to it, and I actually liked it more than the other stuff I've heard. But I think most of the albums by Dream Theater I've heard are the later ones. And if I'm right, thinking this is one of their earlier ones, right?
Very early.
Yeah. So to me, it kind of sounds almost a bit more less experimental, a bit more of upbeat and poppy, a bit more like the Take the Time era. Not that I'm saying that I'm not saying it's mainstream, but it seems a bit more groovy.
No, I agree, man.
Yeah. And I really like that opening track because it's 6 o'clock. That was an instant hit for me. I just thought I couldn't help get up and sort of really move to that. It had a real kind of dance music vibes, and also kind of I love the keyboards.
It's got lots of crazy time signatures in it, so you must have been dancing very carefully.
Yes. But I love it's like the organ music in that. It's quite almost like it's quite psychedelic, almost like gospel in a way. I thought that was very good.
Well, there are a few things I could say about the keyboards and keyboardist on this album a bit later on.
Okay.
But yeah, it's when you've finished saying what you want to say.
Yeah, so no, I immediately thought of Take the Time, which is a Dream Theater song that I really like. And would you agree that later Dream Theater is a bit more mellow and sort of experimental? I don't mean inaccessible, but a bit more experimental in what they do.
Well, it's weird that you should say experimental, because I kind of see some of their early albums as really just them sort of trying to find their feet and sort of carve out an identity for themselves, and sort of where they fit into in this sort of that they're all Berklee College music students,
right? Okay.
And they all sort of met each other at music school. They sort of formed a bond over the metal and prog music that they listened to, and ended up forming Dream Theater. And I think in the early albums, the 5 band members contributed a lot more evenly to the songwriting than as it would go on, where 1 or 2 members were just kind of primarily John Petrucci and then Mike Portnoy, who would then leave. To me, that there was a lot more experimentation in their early albums, and then as they got to Train of Thought kind of era, they were kind of like more of a standard metal band, but with more of an emphasis on instrumentation and longer songs, and that kind of thing. And it was around that sort of time I think they found a sort of template that they have followed ever since, really. I mean, it's that's when they almost kind of found their template sound,
right?
And from the sort of mid 2000s to now, you kind of know what you're getting with a Dream Theater release. Whereas it's like I say, it's interesting you'd use that word experimental, because I thought there was more experimenting with different kinds of songwriting in those early albums, in the Images and Words and Awake era.
Okay, that's interesting. I think what I meant is
long-winded, but I tend to be long-winded.
The way he belts out some of those lyrics, it felt very kind of almost like classic power rock to me, almost like classic American rock music, more so than the later stuff I've heard. If that makes sense, I don't know.
Yeah, totally. Well, James LaBrie, their singer, has a bunch of stuff happened to the band after this album, basically. So James LaBrie had an accident where he ate a bad curry or something, and he ended up getting an illness and vomiting a lot, and this ruined his vocal cords. That still affects him today. So that has sort of diminished his ability to do like the kind of falsetto and the kind of singing that he does on Images and Words and Awake, and that's probably why, because I kind of really feel that he was at James was at the peak of his abilities on the Awake album. And if unless you had any more sort of burning sort of things that jumped out at you that you wanted.
I was just trying to sort of listen to it and compare it to, you know, the genre of music that I am listening to more these days and like, and I just thought it feels very grandiose and operatic overall. Which I quite like, but I couldn't help thinking that it was an album that was built for a theatre. You know, it's almost like seeing is it Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds kind of thing? I can imagine that kind of thing with lots of.
That's interesting. That's,
you know, rather than seeing a gig, seeing, you know, a play or a metal opera.
Yeah. That's very interesting that you should say that. Yeah. I mean, so if there was, you've mentioned you quite liked 6 o'clock. Any other standout tracks?
Actually, track 4, I can't remember what track that is.
Erotomania.
Yeah, I've put very long instrumental section with complex waltzing guitar.
Yeah.
Which, so that definitely stood out. And do you know what? Just sometimes do you ever listen to an album and you're suddenly reminded of something else, another band album, and you don't know why exactly? Maybe it's because there is a similarity, or maybe it just there's some other random reason. But I almost thought they reminded me a little bit of Toto in a way as well.
Yes.
Track 3 I've put has an almost Toto feel about it.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, well, I've always kind of described Toto as like kind of like your dad's Dream Theater in a way. It's almost kind of like Dream Theater were almost kind of like Toto for like the Metallica generation. But I mean, needless to say, I like this album a lot. And out of all of Dream Theater's albums, as a band that I listen to extensively, to the point where some albums I kind of think, oh, I've heard this enough, you know, I'm a bit exhausted on this album now. Awake is an album that keeps like coming back to me. It's one that I keep regularly picking up. And I don't know if you've ever had that where it just gets to a certain time of year or you're in a certain sort of mood, and those songs, like a song from a particular album or a particular phase in a band's career, like really just start to come into your head, and it's almost like telling you, your body is telling you it's time to give that album a spin again. Like I do not, even though, you know, I love many of Dream Theater's albums, I do not get that as much with many of their other albums, even some that most fans consider to be their very best albums. I do not get that with their other albums as much as I do Awake. And there are a lot of interesting situational things around this album. You mentioned the keyboards and the sort of organ, the Hammond organ style of it. The keyboard for this record, at the end of the recording of this album, he just quit the band altogether and has had not too much to do with music since. I think he's actually a psychiatrist now.
Oh, really? Wow.
Which is quite interesting. But there's a lot of his influence on this album. The lyrics to 6 o'clock specifically are about him falling out of love with metal music, basically. The lyrics to that song, and I tell a lie, he did an album of music after this as a solo project, and it was a band called Chroma Key, and if you listen to that, it is not Dream Theater at all. Like it's that might be another album I sort of put forward for this podcast, but he was he was getting more into more atmospheric music. He was really into like Tori Amos and electronic stuff like Brian Eno, and
I love Brian
he
Eno.
was just and he was just there's a lyric in 6 o'clock that goes, so many ways to drown a man, so many ways to drag him down, some are fast, some take years and years, and that is about him basically being in in a musical project that he's kind of lost passion for. And there's another line later on in the song that goes, he's finally found the right sound, but he's in too deep. And it's sort of like, that's him sort of writing about his sort of frustration with and his contribution with the keyboard parts, especially on the track The Mirror, like the way those Hammond organs like really come in with like the distorted guitars and that like crushingly heavy riff at the beginning. And the final song as well, Space Divest, is that's a song that he is very much like his song, and like the lyrics are by him, the music is by him, the band contributed a bit, but that's that's kind of his song, and it's a very sort of like depressing song about like lost love and sort of mental stagnation and like creative stagnation and that kind of thing. There are some other elements to this album as well. The song The Mirror is about the drummers that struggle with alcoholism, basically. And there's the song Voices as well, that's like John Petrucci sort of like singing about his own creative frustrations and sort of being misunderstood and that kind of thing. And like Innocence Faded is quite an upbeat song, but it's like got quite it's got sort of quite downer lyrics in it. And if you compare I was just gonna say, if you compare that with Take the Time and the album that preceded it, it's a lot more sort of personal, it's a lot more and I think that adds the sort of tumultuous time in that the band was going through at that time, with members leaving and stuff, kind of added to the dark vibe that album has, I would say.
And it does seem to go off in different directions. Like track 7 is quite heavy in comparison. Very kind of moshy, I thought.
It's one of my favorite songs ever, The Mirror. I just remember because it's preceded by The Silent Man, which is an acoustic song, and then it's just like ring. I love it.
Which I like that. I admire that sort of going off in different directions and not being the same kind of level throughout.
Totally, yeah.
But Space Divest, is that the last one?
That's it, yeah.
There's lots of audio clips or something, and I can't remember. I did look up. What's that from? I did look it up, but I can't remember.
The first one, they're from a number of things. The first one is a quote from a movie called A Room with a View. Which is quite interesting, because I actually watched A Room with a View, not knowing that the quote from this Dream Theater song was taken from that film. And that scene in the movie, I mean, it's a more light-hearted story, and he's sort of talking about like Julian Sands, who is he Warlock?
He is, yeah.
Obviously his greatest role. But he's talking about, he doesn't really love you, like, he wants you as a possession. And in the context of that quote used in the song, you sort of, you get the impression that it's probably quite a serious, like, impactful scene. But in the film, it's more of a light. The film's more light-hearted. It's not got as much gravitas to it. There are other quotes in Space Divest, one of which is from a really troubling, quite harrowing documentary called The Trouble with Evan, that is about it's a real story about a kid that was just a complete tearaway at school and was like biting other kids and like pulling their hair and stuff.
Yeah.
And it was a sort of, I think it was a news crew that sort of went to this child's home life and sort of tried to sort of get a grasp on why, you know, this kid was acting this way in school and just was so antisocial. And it's just basically just a document of this kid's dad just treating him like shit, basically, and just sort of like, you know, and it's not even physical abuse, more just sort of like emotional and mental kind of, and the dad just sort of being like, you've got to be a man, son, you've got to be a man, like, you know, you've got to, I'm not going to hug you, like I'm not some, you know, that's for weaklings, women, kind of thing. And it's just like the way like that kind of, you know, depriving someone of that sort of emotional closeness like manifests itself in, you know, in quite troubling ways. And I promised you I was going to bring this back to David Cronenberg films.
Yes.
I want to see if this is right, because I think The Mirror uses a quote from the film Dead Ringers in it.
Okay.
Yeah, there's definitely Jeremy Irons.
Do you remember what the quote was?
Yeah, it was. He goes, "It's not like that. There are things you can't control."
That does sound like it's from Dead Ringers, but
really,
yeah.
Yes. Movie quotes in Dream Theater lyrics. There we go. Okay. Here we go. Well, because Cinema Paradiso, apparently that's referenced in Take the Time.
It's all coming together. Tim Burgess and Dream Theater.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it sure is. It sure is. Yeah. Well, hopefully the connection's not going to cut out while I'm talking about Cinema Paradiso. Yeah. But yeah, there's a bit of Cinema Paradiso in that. There's in The Mirror, there's a quote from the film Light Sleeper, which has got Willem Dafoe in it. I'm gonna have to watch all these films now. They reference Dead Poet Society, Magnolia.
Yeah. Oh wow! So they're very into their movies and knowledgeable.
Yeah, they're filmophiles. Yeah.
Yeah, which is great, because I, not to compare them to other sort of metal bands.
I'm sorry, Dan. It's not from Dead Ringers. It's from a film called Damage.
Right.
From 1992. I haven't behaved as I should have done. I thought you could control life, but it's not like that. There are things you can't control.
Okay.
So yeah, if I will send you the list of movie quotes that Dream Theater have used in their songs.
Yep.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No, I was just going to say, other metal bands that I can think of, I always thought never referenced film so much. I mean, my knowledge is not very extensive, but I always thought that there wasn't so much referencing of, you know, books and movies in metal bands. But maybe I'm thinking more of like Megadeth, and I'm sure you could probably tell me.
You've got Anthrax. Yeah, no, you'll probably find loads of, like, you know, quotes to media in metal, because you know, you tend to find that a lot of metalheads are quite geeky deep down, and you know, sort of like the odd horror movie or the odd video game or two. So you might find a lot more than that than you'd expect. But
actually, I take that back, because I do remember one Anthrax song references Dennis Hopper in Blue Velvet. So
he does. And and The Stand by Stephen King and Judge Dredd.
Right. So there's quite a lot.
Which is very much they did a song called I Am the Law, which is it's a cool song, but you almost kind of get the feeling that they're taking Judge Dredd at face value a bit. Like, it's sort of like, yeah, it's good to be like a
fascist,
a fascist guy who goes around like stomping criminals' heads in.
Yeah.
Fuck those guys. It's a cool song though. It's called I Am the Law, if I didn't mention that already. He judges the rich, he judges the poor. yeah, I'm trying to think of other bands that
Okay.
like reference movies and stuff. I'll think of some. I'll think of some and
Yeah.
send them to you. But yeah, so I've gone on about Awake a bit.
Yeah.
Uh,
You're gonna
what
hate
would you?
this.
Oh
But
yeah, go on, go on, go on.
no, as I say, I like the album, but when it got to track 9, I had sort of was looking at my watch a little bit, and I'd sort of had my fill of it. But the last track was very good. But I think
Yeah.
the thing is, I prefer shorter albums, and I guess it's the nature of pop songs which tend to be shorter. And I know you like longer songs and
Oh, I
really
love a
long
long song. I
albums.
love them.
So that's the only thing I would say. But yeah, really good album. I would probably give it 7.5, 8 out of 10, maybe.
Oh, cool. Yeah,
So
that's pretty good. That's pretty good.
yeah.
I was track number 9 as well. That is almost kind of like, it's almost a U2 song, isn't it? Lifting
Hmm.
Shadows. This sort of like I say, there's sort of like, you got like the lighter songs, you got the heavier songs
Hmm.
kind of thing, because it's almost like they're trying to find their feet.
Yeah.
But yeah, cool. That's 8 out of 10. Yeah, that's a success.
Yes.
um so yeah, I mean, that's coming up to an hour. I guess
Yeah.
that's the end of this episode.
One final
Um
question, Lyle. Do you
go
like
on.
them all?
What?
Do you like them all?
The mall?
They say that you can't win them all, but you can if you're at them all. So that was one of the songs on I Love the New Sky.
Oh, I
And you were like, oh fuck, by that point
that
I
completely
switched
went
off.
over my head.
It's like by that point I was fucking
I have
earplugs
to
in.
admit, a lot of the lyrics, I was trying to forget them as I was listening to them.
Oh,
Sorry. What song is it from? What song is it from?
them all.
Yeah, which one was that?
I think track 7 or something.
Track 7. Oh, I've only listened to that one once. Actually, no, there was one. There was one that yeah, because the song "Lucky Creatures."
Mm,
That is one you just can't get out of your head after you've heard it
mm.
once. The lucky creatures. Da, da,
I admire
da.
these features.
And yeah. There was one very close after that one that I had to skip because I really didn't like it. So it might have been that one.
Oh, okay, right.
I
Okay.
will go back and listen to it again. I'll give it a fair shout.
See if we can
Um,
get it up from 5 to 8. No,
five
that's
five to
ridiculous.
6. Yeah. Well, if I listen to it enough. It might get there. But yeah,
Yeah.
good 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 chat. I think we both learned something
Yes, we have.
today.
And I think yes, as we said, there are actually quite a lot of similarities between the two,
There are, yeah, and you wouldn't
surprisingly.
think, would you? You wouldn't
No.
think. It's that kind of like I say, like, I mean, this kind of, I don't think there's any doubt that prog is for nerds, but
Mm,
like this kind of, I think that's one of the things I was sort of enthusiastic about sort of getting across with this sort of podcast, is that yeah, there's kind of like this idea that, metal is just kind of like fist punching, like kind of chest beating,
mm.
like I'm a
Yeah.
fucking alpha male kind of
Well,
thing.
yeah.
And it's kind of like that. It's not really what a lot of my favorite bands are like. And, it's sort of
Mm,
like, I do think there are more artistic qualities
mm,
to the bands that I like that might get overlooked. But similarly, there might be a lot of music that I'm, not interested in engaging with, and have biases about, that, I might not be uh giving full credit either, kind of
yeah.
thing.
Well, I
Um,
think you could say the same about the pop music and the kind of some of the Manchester stuff as well. Is more
Definitely,
artistic
yeah.
and thoughtful than you might think. Where
Mm.
when in a lot of people in their mind probably think of the smarm and the attitude of Liam Gallagher or something.
That
You
sounds
know,
that sounds like it would be a great name for a parody indie band, the Smarm.
The
like
Smarm. Oh, that's
yeah.
great. Yeah, let's do it. The Smarm. Okay.
We should we should form a band to do our theme song for earbuds,
Yeah.
and it should be called the Smarm.
The Smarm.
And
Yeah.
and that can be our, our claim to fame if this all
Yeah.
fails horribly.
We'll have a track that gets to number 2 in the charts, and
Oh
we'll
yeah.
never be able to match that success again.
And then it'll be like, oh, what could have been if only they hadn't.
Oh, the Smarm, what that band that did that one song. And we're like, no, we did lots of songs actually.
Yeah, exactly.
If you listen to
The
them, we're not known
earbuds
for that
theme.
one song. Okay.
Anyway, yeah, it's getting
That's
to that
enough
point where
about
we're starting to get a bit silly, so it's probably
Oh,
time to
okay,
stop
we
the
don't want
recording.
that.
As a bit of an epilogue, I've got an idea for the next album I'm going to recommend. Do you?
Yeah. Yes, I do.
Cool. Nice. Well,
Should we reveal now or do it in secret?
nah, let's make it a surprise, mate. Let's make it a surprise. Let's
Okay,
let's
yeah.
leave them wanting more.
Yeah, leave them wanting more, keep them guessing.
Yeah. Okay then.
Right.
This has been Earbuds episode 2. Ta-ta.
Yes. Thank you for listening,
now.
everyone.
Yes. Goodbye.
Bye.
Fuck off.